The Michael Berry Show.
Michael Fulweber is our guest. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you having me on this morning.
So let's start with the premise. I know the circumstances because you and I have been communicating for a little while, but let's start with let's set the scene for people who know nothing. If you would explain the whole situation, and then we'll take it from there through the court proceedings all the way up to the sentence.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate situation. Cameron was a guy that I went to high school with. He was a few years older than me, but about 10 years ago, he happened to move next door. And, we rekindled our friendship, became great friends. We barbecued. We did everything together. In fact, he worked for me a little bit, but ironically, his son became my lead tech. And, I don't know what happened. He's always had anger issues, but I would argue somewhat controllable. And, one day he just snapped and ended up stabbing a canine police dog, Nate has a huge following now. Went to jail, was released on a very low bond. And, we had people at our house that Saturday night. He did that Saturday morning, and people were at our house Saturday night. We were saying, do not let him out. But Cameron was, it's his son. So, got him out on a very low bond. And next thing you know, Cameron's missing. We can't find him. Ryan's missing. He missed his court date. And, a few days later, we find his body hidden in the garage. And lo and behold, life in prison. So that's a 30,000-foot view. We can go a lot deeper, but
yeah, let's dig into that.
Shocking.
So when Ryan Smith, who is the man who's been given a life sentence, who would kill his father, who was your next door neighbor and good friend, Cam, when he was arrested for stabbing the canine, and he was given a low bond, what actually happened in the case where the canine was necessary?
So what happened, Ryan, he was not acting right, and police tried to arrest him or at least get a mental evaluation on him that Friday. And unfortunately, the police said, hey, there's no beds available. And he was released to his mother, that's an injustice right there, in my opinion. He ended up staying at his mother's house that night, and for whatever reason, he left her house and stole a phone charger from HEB. So now the police are looking for him. And then he tried to carjack a doctor out of Chicago. I think he's from Chicago. Beat him up pretty good where he had some vision problems and could not get into his car. The guy had the keys in his pocket and the car was not running. So he took off. Police are on him. He ended up jumping from one parking garage to another in an apartment complex. It wasn't a very far jump, but the police were on him. And as they got down to the ground level, I heard one officer rounded the corner, and Ryan had the butcher knife in the air and was stabbing him. And how the cops did not shoot him is beyond me, but that's initially what started and triggered everything on this unfortunate set of events.
My friend Matt Bryce at Federal American Grill hosted a big event, 6 months or so ago. And you sponsor a dog, I think it's $3,500 for HPD, and that covers the expenses that are not covered by HPD for the guys and their dog, and you get to quote-unquote adopt a dog, and you pick which one, and they show you the photos. Those guys, I've talked to, my brother had a canine. In fact, we took her name was Babe, when she was done with her useful life, and my wife wanted to take her in, and my brother said, no, she's a working dog. She's a drug and cadaver dog. She can't be a family dog, but we made her a family dog. Anyway, the attachment those guys have, and across the force, when an officer, when a canine dies, the emotion these guys have, I am just shocked, as you said, that they didn't blast this guy if he's stabbing this dog. I'm shocked. And they would have done us all a favor if they had. But so then it goes before Judge Josh Hill, and he gives a very low bond. Do you know what the amount of that bond was?
I don't remember, but, let's assume, I don't know, what is a bond? You come up with 10%.
Yeah.
I think they, $5,000 to $8,000 is what the family had to come out of pocket.
Okay, so probably a $50,000 bond. Okay.
You would think so, but, attempted murder on, let's call it a police officer, that's way too low.
No, I 100% agree. And we've got a guy who's having mental health episodes, and that's a very, very dangerous, volatile situation. That guy does not need to be back out on the streets. So he gets the bond. And are you aware? So he ends up at his father's house, who's your next door neighbor. Did you know that he was there at the time?
Yeah, so Cam was at my house, and he said, "Look, I'm bringing Ryan home." Apparently, they went to Ryan's mother's house. They're divorced, and they were trying to figure out what to do. Cam brought him home next door. This was Sunday, and Ryan supposedly went upstairs, went to bed, and Cam was all worried about him and said, we need to call the police again for what's called an EDO warrant. I don't know anything about that, but apparently that's a mental health evaluation.
Yeah.
And so it must have been about 10 o'clock. They show up and we tell them, hey, stop short. Don't go in front of Cam's house. You stop in front of our house is not to spook this kid, right? And we're talking to them, and Cameron's like, just go upstairs, talk to him, but, don't hurt him. He's a good kid. And they said, okay, what room is he in?
All right, hold right
and
there.
So,
hold right there, Mike. These cases of people with mental health problems and the police having to it's every day, and it's so tough. Michael Fulweber, who's our guest, lived next door to his friend Cam Smith. Cam's son, Ryan, was out on bond from Judge Josh Hill when the son murdered the father. So, Michael, let's go back to him being released. How did you feel about knowing that a guy was released, even though your buddy was your next door neighbor and it was his son, understanding that this guy was clearly a danger? I mean, he stabbed a police canine and in the commission of a robbery.
Well, obviously it's extremely concerning, but there's two sides to that coin. Ryan was also my lead tech for my company. So, I had a relationship with him as well. And I didn't know what was going on. And I said this as well in court. It's like, I'm not a doctor. I don't know if he's having a mental health breakdown. I don't know if this is years of anger piling up on itself, or a drug that was prescribed to him, or a narcotic that he took that was, I don't know. So him being released, I thought, was premature just because there was too many unknowns. There has to, the brutal attack on a police officer, Canine Nate, with a butcher knife, and he's going to come home within I guess he spent overnight in jail. That's unacceptable. That's a danger to our society.
I guess Judge Josh Hill is following orders. So then how long is it between that period of time and y'all discover your neighbor, Cam Smith, murdered by his son, your employee?
So that was Sunday night. I stayed up to moving into Monday morning in my driveway up to about, 2:30 or 3 in the morning. I promised Cam, I said, look, I'll watch that window. I'll make sure he doesn't jump out. Cam said he would stay awake in his house. We just wanted to make sure the kid was safe because he had court on Monday to answer for what he did on Saturday with the canine. And, I started falling asleep, so I went to bed. My Ring camera went off. I jumped out of bed. I see some flashlights, but I think I'm dreaming. I don't know what's going on. I go back to bed. The next morning, he misses his court date. Cam's phone is on, I think it was in the kitchen or on the nightstand. I'm not sure. So now it's what's going on? Did Cam and Ryan go to the deer lease and want to, just talk father-son, and then we'll figure out about, going in front of the judge? I don't know what's going on, but he had bludgeoned Cam in in the garage. I would think Monday morning at about 4 a.m. If I had to guess, that's just me guessing. We didn't find him till Tuesday. He had wrapped him up in a carpet and cleaned the scene because, Michael, I have a crime scene cleaning company, and he's my lead tech. So he was able to clean up the scene to where I couldn't find the body. The police officers multiple times could not find his body. And so it took us a while. But
Wow.
what happened was he came back, and as the homicide detectives were leaving, Cam is still in the garage. As they're leaving, they see Ryan down the street in Cameron's truck, and then the chase was on, goes to Memorial Park. They're searching for him. They find the murder weapon in the back of Cameron's truck. He somehow evades police. He evades canine, and he evades the drones. He hops on a train, and they catch him, I think, Waller County, using my company credit card. So it's a bizarre event that could have been solved, after the canine. None of this, it's unfortunate that happened to Canine Nate, but have him sit there on a higher bond and let's figure this out. That's the problem with that low bond.
Do you have any idea the circumstances behind it? Has he said anything about, I think it's a dumbbell that he used to bludgeon his father to death, how that came about, how it came down?
Yeah, once we found Cam or knew where he was, I theorized that, hey, they went out into the garage and opened up the freezer. Cam went to open up the freezer because I guarantee Ryan said, hey, Dad, let's take out some hamburger meat or elk, whatever. And as Cam bit down, that's where Ryan attacked him. His back was turned. And then I think that later came out in court that was the truth.
Well, I want to hold just a moment because I want to hold you over to explain your role in this trial and how the trial ended up and your influence on how that ended up. But quickly, before we get to that, I think I read, let's see, in the Chronicle story, it said, he believed his father was no longer human and he wanted to escape Texas for safety in westward states. That's a pretty bad mental health episode.
Something was happening, and again, I kept saying to the defense, I'm not a doctor, but, that's clearly odd behavior.
All right, we'll talk about that trial. The verdict came out on Friday. Coming up, Michael Fulweber is our guest. He owns a company that does hazardous material, hazardous waste cleanup, like after someone's been murdered. And his next door neighbor, Cam, has a son named Ryan who works for our guest Michael as his lead technician at the blood splattered cleanup company. The son, Ryan, murdered his father. And we're to the point of the trial now, bludgeoned him to death with a dumbbell because Judge Josh Hill released him on a low bond so that he could go home and kill his father. Michael Fulweber is our guest. Michael, you and I spoke on Friday. You were delighted with the life in prison sentence and you felt that it was the right sentence. But there was an important point in the trial. And let's go back and let me set this up. The son, Ryan, because you were his boss and you lived next door, called you after the murder and y'all had conversations. Tell about that.
We had multiple conversations. He called me in jail, and I would take his call. At the end of the day, he's still a human being. If he's, in a manic state, non-manic state, I don't know. We still have a history there, and to be honest with you, when I took his calls, for me, I wanted to have more an investigative role. I wanted to know what's going on. I wanted to know, what is going through his mind. Now, we both know that these calls are going to be recorded and they can be used in a court of law. I knew that all along, which is fine. Ryan held his cards pretty close to his vest and never really gave up much as far as the trial, as far as what he was feeling, with regards to his father, the circumstances, etc. And I know there was one call that was played in court when I was on the stand. This is after he was found guilty. This is now the sentencing part where, he said he was praying for me and for circumstances, and I said I was praying for him. And, it was just a normal conversation, Michael, like you and I are having right now. It was, again, more of a fact-finding mission for me. And so they played this in court, which that's fine. And they said, "Is that the Ryan you know?" I said, "Yeah, he also showed signs of anger, but that's certainly a side that I've seen of Ryan." And they looked at me just so pleased, the defense, and said, "Well, how many years do you think Ryan needs in jail?" And I looked right back at him and I said, 99. And that took them back. They said, "How in the world can you be so nice, have great conversations with this guy, but want him away for the rest of his life?" And I stopped him. I said, "Look, I'm an encourager. He's still a human being. He can still have a ministry in prison. There's still life for Ryan in prison." And to be honest with you, if he had a low sentence, I think I'd be terrified for my life if he got out. And when they were pushing 5 to 10 years, that scared me. It legitimately made me nervous if he was going to get out in 5 to 10 with 3 years already served in county jail.
So he did get life in prison. That's where we are now. Let me rewind for a moment, Michael. This guy worked for you and ends up bludgeoning his dad to death. It's one thing to shoot somebody. That's the pulling of a trigger. But you're probably talking about multiple blows. You're talking about blood. You're talking about force and the person moaning. I mean, this is a very involved murder. Did you ever have a sense, that this guy was capable of this? Did you have problems with him in the past?
I had seen anger issues in the past where I was like, "Ryan, that's not normal, man. You cannot get that angry over X, Y, or Z." One was on the golf course, and I thought it was totally bizarre. But then on the other hand, he can be a normal, nice kid. So, yes, I've seen it, and I've seen both sides of it. Now, again, did everything come to a head? Did he have such rage that everything came to a head? And did something accelerate that? Was there drugs involved? I don't know. But it got so severe he murdered Cam.
How long did he work for you?
I think he worked for me for about 4 years, and that's a guess, but I believe it was about 4 years.
So did you notice during that 4 years a decline?
Never a decline until maybe a few months before, but it wasn't very noticeable. The week prior, yes, there was a decline, but it was always walk on eggshells with Ryan. If something is amiss on a job site, meaning it goes out of protocols and we need to think out of the box, he would get very agitated. But it did seem obviously to come to a head that week. And that's why we were just so concerned. It's what in the world is going on with this kid? It was just, it was surreal. Even looking back now and reliving it in my mind, and I'm sure others that were involved in the neighborhood, just reliving it, it's surreal. It's not real. It seems like a fairy tale, somewhat a nightmare of a fairy tale.
Wow. When you and I were talking on Friday, you were very angry that the defense brought up your late son's passing. as part of
Yes.
their defense. Why was that?
Yeah. So my son passed away 10 months ago yesterday. He was our only son, 15. Oh, you're going to get me choked up, Michael. So I think they wanted to play that in that phone call I mentioned to pull out an emotion of empathy from me, to soften me. So their leading question after that was, how many years does Ryan need? After talking about my son on that phone call. And it was a tactic, and it backfired, because I looked right back at him and I said, 99 years, don't you ever bring my son into this court again.
I don't know if you remember, but Jackson passed on the evening of the day we gathered, you and I and others, and Dennis Rodman, for fried catfish at Federal American Grill. That's how I remember that day.
That's right. And then I sent you an email that weekend, and you sent me a nice email back. Condolences, of course.
Yeah, I don't know that words could do justice to what you're going through when your son passes, but that is rough. Michael, thank you for sharing this story. There's no happy ending here, alas.
No.
But it is a revelation into a system and into life. I mean, look, mental health problems are real, and they're serious, and they're hard to deal with.
The Michael Berry Show.